Unit number 17, tuning and maintaining the kernel. In this unit, we are going to discussing about these topics: supported architectures and kernel identification, managing kernel modules, specifying the kernel boot parameters, upgrading your kernel. So this kernel, what are the architectures it will support? So how to know that? That means how to identify whether it is support the x86 64 or 32-bit. How to know that? And how to manage the kernel modules. What is meant by module and how it manages. And specify the kernel boot parameters. Where is this kernel parameters will be stored over there? How to enable those kernel parameters, how to disable those kernel parameters, and at last upgrading your kernel. So that means how the kernel will be upgraded. Now you are using RHEL 6.0 or something, RHEL 6.2 kernel. Now I want to upgrade into RHEL 6.3. So how it will be possible? This is the topics we are going to discuss in this unit. We will see now. Tuning and maintaining kernel. So what is the basics for this? What is the proc or everything we are going to discuss now. The heart of Red Hat Linux is the Linux kernel. The kernel is responsible for interacting with the hardware and producing output to the screen. There is also virtual file system will be there. We have virtual file system that gets created in the /proc directory. That is a directory, /proc directory. It holds the information and the parameters of the kernel. What are the related to the information of the kernel and what are the parameters related to that kernel, it will be kept in this /proc directory. So Linux is a truly just the kernel. Red Hat and other distributions of existence today are software configuration files packaged with the Linux kernel to bring you entire operating system. So what are the Red Hat Linux and what are the distribution of this? Nothing but SUSE, Ubuntu, some of the CentOS operating systems. All these operating systems has the software and the configuration files packaged with the Linux kernel to bring you entire operating system. So the kernel can be used to load a new drivers. It will support the new hardware even if after your custom kernel for individual needs. So how to check that? Can you load the kernel modules even after the system has booted? So these kind of things we are going to discussing now. So for that, the commands are uname. It displays information about the kernel. lsmod lists currently loaded kernel modules mod info displays information about a kernel module. Sysctl it enables you to run kernel parameters. So how we'll see. Let's start with uname command. Uname options will be there. What are those options? -a prints all information relating to the kernel. It prints all information to the kernel. -s it shows the kernel name. -r request kernel release information. -v it requests the kernel version. So for that, what is the command you have to check? Uname space -a. The kernel version numbering, it will display. The first number is the major version. See, if it is like this, Linux 2.6.32 -71.e16.x86 underscore 64. If it is like this, the kernel version numbering is important here. The first number is the major version of the kernel, that is 2. The second number is the major release of the first number, and if the release number is even, which is it 6, it means that this is the stable release of the kernel. The odd numbers are development kernels and should not be used for production systems. So the third number is a patch version of the kernel. So patch version of the kernel. The last number 71 is added by the Red Hat to represent its relevant version of the kernel. And also note that E16, which is you tells that Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6. So it's an internal version, 64-bit operating system. that is noted by the x86_64. So everything is referred as a 2.6 kernel or later. So if you want to check whether the kernel is installed or not, what is the query for this? rpm space hyphen qa grep kernel. You can give the rpm space hyphen q kernel. Will query the what are the kernel's different locations. It will display the locations. So here we can get the slash boot file slash proc slash usr slash src slash lib modules. Place where the kernel and boot files are kept. This is for boot, where the kernel and boot files will be are kept. Slash proc current hardware configuration and status slash usr slash src source code of the kernel modules. Slash boot is a place where the kernel and boot files will be stored, will be kept, and slash proc is the current hardware configuration and its status, and slash usr slash src source code of the kernel, and a slash lib slash modules, kernel modules will be stored over there. Kernel is also used to boot the operating system. So because a kernel is a modular, so it is important to understand which modules are in use and how to view them. Okay, before that, so we can check this in the lab, how the kernel will be, architecture will be there. Uname space, just you can give it gives in your operating system. Uname space hyphen architecture. Linux demo.example.com is your server. 2.6.32 hyphen 71 E16 x86 64. 2 is the major version, 6 is the minor version, what we given there, and 71 is the whatever we are kept, that kernel is added by the Red Hat to release the version of the kernel. E16 is for internal version number for a kernel, and x86 64 is for 64-bit operating system, right? So uname space hyphen r releases version, uname space hyphen m mode, that is nothing but architecture. So you can get these options. rpm space hyphen q grep kernel hyphen qa So what are the related kernel? Related, we can get it. So kernel is related. Same thing you can get rpm space hyphen q, query of that files will be there. So working with the kernels in different locations. Those are 4 different locations. One is cd/boot. Once given 2.6.32, your kernel information will be there, and you can go cd/proc. You can get the all the whatever the hardware configuration and status, we can get it over there. And if you move cd/usr/src, the source of kernels, you can get the debug, ls will be there. So another source code of kernel will be there. We can move into the one more here, lib/modules. Here this is a module of kernel 2.6.32 E16 of your kernel modules will be available. What is this module? So in this unit, supported architectures and kernel identification we discussed. Now managing kernel modules. What is this kernel modules? So which are under lib/modules. So kernel is also used to boot the operating system, right? So because the kernel is a modular, it is important to understand which modules are in use and how to view them, which are we are using and how to view them. So for that, ls mode command to view the modules or which are currently loaded. If you want to get any information on that modules, just you can go to the mode info, that modular name. So if I have the ext4 module is there, you can get the information on this. So you can get the information. Now we will see same thing. I'll show you in the lab. ls mod list out the all the modules. Under this, if you want to get mode info, here ext4 is there. Just I'm giving ext4. So the file name where it is stored /lib/modules 2.6.32. The kernel we already seen. The kernel file system ext4. Okay. The 4th extended file system. Description about that modular. What is the author? What is the version? When it is depends. Everything we can get this information from here. Okay. Now we are moving into the in this unit next topic, that is specifying the kernel boot parameters. What is a kernel boot parameters? How to specify that? In this unit we are going to discussing. So how to tune this kernel using that kernel parameters. Using that kernel boot parameters only we can tune that kernel. We already discussed the kernel has a virtual file system, that is nothing but /proc. So it is used to allow you to tune the kernel while the system is running, because that is virtual, right? That's why while the system is running, it is used to tune the kernel. The kernel creates /proc/sys virtual system when the system boots up, so which holds all the parameters of the kernel. So this virtual machine, that is nothing but this virtual file system used to manipulate the kernel parameters and testing purposes. So when you have the kernel tuned that way you would like to, unless the system boots. So how we will see? The kernel will be increases. How to tune that? So I will have an example. What is the commands we are using for this? Tuning the kernel. Cat space /proc sys /net /IP version 4 /IP_forward. Once you get, maybe it is IP forwarding, the packets will be 0. You want to enable to view the current value of the kernel. To change the kernel options means cat space 1 redirection symbol /proc /sys /net /IP version 4 /IP_forward. Maybe it will be increases the value. Now you can check at the time. So if you want to changes, if you want to be the changes in the persistently after crossing the reboots, so at the time you can give this /etc/sysctl.conf. The configuration file is /etc/sysctl.conf. Using this sysctl.conf, you can after rebooting also persistently also you can run the kernel, that parameters. And we have syntax here sysctl options -e, so that means ignores errors, -w enables you to change a setting in the /etc/sysctl.conf -p loads settings from the /etc/sysctl.conf -a displays all settings available. So how we will see all the settings will be available. We'll see in the lab. sysctl space -a, it will list out. So under that count, if you want to check means wc space -l 699 kernel lines will be there. That means kernel parameters 699 kernel parameters will be there. Under that, I have a parameter that is responsible for forwarding the packets within the kernel. So it wants to forward the packets within the kernel. So for that, sysctl space -a grep IP underscore forward. So we can directly switch on that kernel. sysctl space -w net dot IP version 4 dot IP underscore forward equal to 1. You can check their forward, that is forward equal to 1. Same thing you can check in the kernel parameters. After returning 0 value means just you can give equal to 0, then it is vim slash etc slash sysctl dot conf net dot IP version 4 equal IP underscore forward equal to 0. Here go there 1 save and exit. Now load the sysctl space -p. It will loads the kernel. So how to tune the parameters? Now how to upgrade the kernel in your operating system. We'll see now updating the kernel. Next topic in this unit, how to upgrade your kernel. So which kind of kernel we are using? So the next topic is upgrading your kernel. So how to upgrade the kernel? What is the use to upgrade the kernel? If some of the update packages is installed, that means they are released by the Red Hat. So you want to upgrade your server with that updated version. So how it will be? We can do that. Okay. So first of all, you have to check which kernel you are running. Uname space -r 2.6.32-71 E16 x86 64. This is a kernel we are using. So you have the information from vim slash etc slash grub.conf. Here your kernel will be titled as Red Hat Linux Enterprise Linux 2.6.32.71 E16 x86 underscore 664. Once you come out from this, you can get the information yum info kernel. It will give the information about the kernel. What is the name and what is the architecture and what is the version for this, when it is releases, size of the kernel, what is the description. So a kernel package contains the Linux kernel, that is virtualization image, the core of any Linux operating system. The kernel handles the basic functions of the operating system, that is memory allocation, process allocation, device input and output, etc. Right, like that it will be taken over there. Now I want to upgrade my kernel. So first of all, I have to get the kernel. So I'm going to downloading the kernel, ftp://192.168.0.254/pub/rhl6/dvd errata/rhl6 underscore x 86 64 rel underscore 64. What are the kernels will be there? I want to download into my server. So that directory is not there. I am going to SSH root at the rate 192.168.0.254. Once you logged in, is ask the password. The password is Red Hat. cd slash var slash ftp slash pub slash rhl 6 slash dvd. This is my path. So wget ftp colon double slash 192.168.0.254 slash pub slash rhl 6 slash errata slash rhl hyphen x 86 underscore 64 hyphen s server hyphen 6. What are the kernel? All the kernels want to be downloaded. So you can check here, the kernel will be downloaded. So the kernel debug 2.6.3 to 7.1, this one I want to install. rpm space hyphen ivh kernel debug 2.632 e1 6 x86 64. So warning, it is giving the warning. So what is the header? It has a dependency, that is kernel firmware. So first we have to install the kernel firmware, then only it will install the kernel debug. So before that we have to install the kernel firmware. So rpm space hyphen ivh kernel firmware dot rpm. So the kernel firmware is installed. Now you can try to install the kernel debug. It is getting installing. It will go and place in the slash etc slash grub.conf. It is taking loading the kernel. Kernel is loaded. You can check him vim slash etc slash grub.conf. Here we can able to see two kernels. See, this is a kernel Red Hat Enterprise Linux 2.6.32-71 e1 6, that is older kernel. This is the latest kernel 71.7.1 e1 6. This is your latest kernel. Okay, save and exit. Just you can give rpm space hyphen qa kernel you can get the kernel firmware, kernel debug, whatever the earlier kernel we have, that we can get it over there. Uname space hyphen r, but still we are using this kernel only. Now I want to use the kernel, latest kernel. So for that I will give here default equal to 1. So that means, what is the default equal to 1? Once we given 0, it will use the first place of my kernel. 0, save and exit, reboot. Now the server is boot up with my latest kernel. Server is getting down. Login, username, root. The kernel is now 2.6.32 71.7.1 E16 x86-64 debug kernel is boot up. So like that you can change, so you can upgrade your kernel. After that rpm space hyphen uvh, if you given kernel means it will be upgrade. Same thing you can get the through yum, just you can give yum info that kernel. Now you can get the information about this kernel 71 E16 x86-64. Now if you want update, just you can give the yum update space hyphen y. If you are registered with RHN, that is Red Hat network, so you can get the updates from the Red Hat, then you can update your kernel directly from the Red Hat. So better to give, so what are the minor changes will be happen in the kernel, that is we can easily you can update, but it's not recommended for major changes. That is how to upgrade your kernel and how to tuning your kernel parameters and how to whether the architecture is support or not, we checked over there. Now just we will go to the small questionnaires under this one. We will discuss some review questions. Question number 1. What is the difference between the update, that is for hyphen u, and install -i options using when using RPM. The second question is what directory is used to represent the virtual file system created by the kernel. Third question, what file is used to maintain custom parameters for the kernel during system reboot. What is a critical step? Critical step must you take after updating the kernel to a newer version. So what is the difference between the update -u and install -i? So what is the when you are using the RPM? And second question is what directory is used to represent the virtual file system created by the kernel? What file is used to maintain custom parameters for the kernel during system reboot? What is the critical step must you take after updating the kernel to a new version? Answers to review questions. Answer to review questions. First one, you should never use the -U option because it erases the prior kernel. So when updates so you should never use the -U option because it erases the prior kernel when updating. This leaves you with no fallback. Kernel should your system not boot properly. So because of this reason, don't use the -U option. You can use the -IVH. So -I, what it will do means it will install the new kernel, and both the kernels will be available in the /etc/grub.conf. Okay. Then second one, What directory is used to represent the virtual file system created by the kernel? Slash proc slash sys directory. And then what file is used to maintain the custom parameters for the kernel during system reboot? That is for slash etc slash sysctl dot conf. sysctl dot conf. And fourth one, so you must ensure that the critical step must you take after upgrading the kernel new version. So that means you first check whether in that slash boot slash grub dot conf file the new entry for your newly updated kernel and able to boot into or not. So you must ensure that the kernel slash boot slash grub dot conf has new entry for kernel whether it is booting or not. Okay, these are the kernel tuning parameters and how updating the kernel and kernel parameters. Now we are going to discussing about the next unit.